How are you?
Hi, Tom. Good. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Congrats on the record.
Thanks. It's a funny time for me when you start talking about an album because you don't talk about it when you're making it.
Yeah, I always am interested to talk to people kind of like right before it comes out because it feels like it's the last few moments where it actually still belongs to you, you know?
It's in transition. It's like you've well, it's weird because I've never been able to write from a place of things that I know too well. I always think if I know something and can talk about it very clearly, then it's like oddly boring, right? You know, like a good example, like there's no like we're talking right now and I'm starting to get hungry, right? And so I know what I'm going to eat, and that's boring, right? You probably even wish I'd stopped talking about it now. There's these other things like these little voices that are kind of screaming inside you, and they're very far away, and you don't know them, but you feel them. And so I always write from that place. My point is, there's such glimpses at the future that sometimes it's not till later that you finish an album and you start talking about it and hearing it back that you actually have the full picture of why you felt the need to talk about those things. So
Yeah,
that's the place I'm in now, and it's actually a little bit uncomfortable occasionally.
I bet. Steve Jobs said, I think he said something like, you have to remember, you when people ask me questions, I can't connect the dots going forward. I can only connect the dots looking backward.
Yeah, it's and it's also just what makes you feel valuable as a writer. Some people are really brilliant at writing things that they like have every angle of and just see clearly and know. I'm particularly feel myself more and feel more valuable if I'm writing these, not to go Donald Rumsfeld on it, but these sort of like unknown, sort of known feelings within me.
In all that, you write these songs before the pandemic, and then something happens that really hasn't happened in our lifetimes before, mine and yours anyway, which is a global pandemic shuts everything down. So, as far as I understand it, Jackie, you had the songs written, then you and your band, like everybody else, has to stop everything for a few months, and then you
I,
go.
I had the framework written. I did a lot of writing, but the framework, what the album was about, had nothing to do with the pandemic.
I think I'm wondering how it felt after taking months off for someone who works as much as you do to finally be back into a studio the moment you were able to do that with your band again.
Well, I didn't take any time off because I have a studio in my apartment, and a large part of my life is being in here alone. Um, so my pandemic was interesting because everything changed, but the hours I would spend, and there's literally a soundproof door, it's right behind me. When that door closes, the world could be in a pandemic, the world could be out partying. I'm here. So that was a bit of an unchanged space. The crazy thing and the huge effect that it had on the sound of this album obviously had a massive effect on me as a human, but that's you know a little separate. Is you know we're on the radio right now, so radio, press, TV, this that, all these things when you grow up as an artist are you're told are just these pies in the sky, right? You can't rely on them. Some days you have it, some days you don't. Maybe you never get it. But live music, if you go out and you play your ass off and you play with the intention of finding your people, you can find your people and you can find your audience. You can be in conversation with them and you can have that forever. And when that was taken off the table, I just can't even describe. I mean, everyone can understand because they have their own version of it in everyone's corner of the world. But I was like, I didn't know that was possible. So that completely changed the sound of the album, which was getting the band in the room and playing in a way which would be impossible to do unless it was happening. And that way was to play as if we might never play again. And it created a lot of frustration and joy. It's the sound of the album. That song you just played, that's the band playing like they're about to fall off the cliff, but they don't. It became a character on the album that took some of these darker stories I'd written before the pandemic and pushed them into a little bit more of a joyful place. A little bit.
You say the band played them like you say the band played them like like you'd never play again. Can you tell me more about that?
I knew we would play again. I didn't know if we would play in the way that we need to play again. My shows aren't, they're people on top of each other, sweating, and I'm jumping in the crowd, and they're, it's as my shows are as much of a super spreader as humanly possible, and I love it, and that's how I grew up playing, and that's how I connect with my audience. So so there was the literal, okay, are we going to play for the next year, two, three, and then there was the other part of it, which is, well, are those times gone? Do people interact like that anymore with what we're going through?
So you're saying there was an urgency in the music you were making with your band together that might not have been there without it.
Without a doubt. It also rocketed me back to a place of dreaming about something versus having something. In the past couple of years, I'd make records and I'd tour, and I'd make records and I'd tour, and these two things would be playing with each other, and I'd make the records alone, I'd bring them out, have them in conversation with the audience. And on this one, I felt a little bit like I felt when I was younger, kind of playing with my friends in a basement where I was dreaming about having an audience.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't real. And then once again, I felt like playing live wasn't technically real. And so I was kind of like playing in a way that it's just different. You can't know it until you do it, but it's a huge character on the album.
You were back in the mirror with the badminton racket. You were back in the mirror with the
kind of, to be honest, yeah. And but the cool part is with all the sort of like craft and knowledge and skill that comes from being on the road and making records over and over and over again, and understanding what you're trying to do and just honing deeper and deeper into your sound. So it was, that part was pretty special. I get really emotional when I hear it back, just the way everyone played.
I want to play a little bit more of the record. Take a listen to this. That is Bleachers with Stop Making This Hurt from their new album, Take the Sadness Out of Saturday Night. Jack Antonoff is my guest. As much as I mean, I think I took what you said earlier about like writing about the unknown knowns as like, when you're first, do you meditate?
I do.
When you meditate and you're at the very beginning, you focus on one place, and then on the other side, you need to still be able to make out the rest of the room, even though you're focusing on one thing directly in front of you. As much as we can focus on the things outside of what are in front of us, can you tell me what that song is about?
It's interesting that you played Stop Making This Hurt and How Do You Want More, because they're about the same thing. But Stop Making This Hurt is a more petulant version, and How Do You Want More is a little bit more of a sort of yelping plea or something. Basically, the album is essentially about, I see it as a doorway, me banging on the door of the next phase of my life. It was a really good place for me to write from, because it had two things which I really recognize in my music, a lot of sadness and a lot of hope. I'm right there, I got all my baggage, and I can't just get through to the other side. And it's this weird dance of, you can't take it all, but you can't leave it all. What are you going to take? These big choices when you're in a transitional moment in your life. So this thing happened when I started writing with this concept, where I started using people in my life, like literal friends and family, as kind of like the device of how I was going to talk about it. Stop Making This Hurt. Daniel puts the kids to bed. Jimmy's on the road tonight. My father's in the room next door. Mom is in the house trying to break free of New Jersey. My sister, I'm talking about, How Dare You Want More, first versus me, second versus my father, third versus my mother. But it's quite literally, it's all about me, because, but I use it as saying, fuck it, man, like Stop Making This Hurt, the petulant version, talking about everyone just getting lost in all the darkness of their life, and the chorus comes around, says, stop making this hurt, say goodbye like you mean it. What I mean by that is, leave this, break through the doorway, leave all the baggage. Only to come around in the bridge to say, if we take the sadness out of Saturday night, I wonder what will be left with anything worth a fight, which is my way of saying, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is how we live. But that's it. I'm trying so hard to find joy, and I have it, and I know what it feels like, which almost makes it more painful when I can't access it. And I see it in people around me, and I can't stop thinking about it.
Jack, I mean, I know I know you went through a terrible tragedy when you were younger with a member of your family, and I'll say that I did too. And what,
Really?
yeah, and when I was listening to this record, I tell you what it made me think of. That I thought when the bad thing happened when I was in my early 20s that I would just have a bad 20s, and then slowly but surely it would end. The things that messed me up would end,
Mm.
and I would go on to live my life like everybody else who didn't have a bad thing happen to them in their 20s. And what your record made me think about in a really sort of actually quite lovely way is that stuff like that never goes away, and that's kind of okay.
It it becomes the lens in which you see the world, and especially I was 18 when my sister died, and so if you're talking about your early 20s, I think it's especially not better or worse, but just interesting to have these sort of like failure to launch moments. I was 18, so my world is opening up. I'm playing music. Everyone's, it's one of the most idealistic times historically in people's life. Similar early 20s, everything's possible. Very little is expected of you if you're lucky. So this other thing, so yes, it never goes away, and it just becomes part of the lens in which you see things. But I wonder if you'll agree with this, because I started having this other feeling when I was making this album. It can also be this crazy huge rug which everything gets brushed under, right? So my sister died, so I have panic attacks because of that. My parents have a relationship. It's because of that. This is that. I have bad relationships. It's all because of that. And what you realize is sometimes a massive trauma, and maybe it's very human to do it, but it can take the place of everything, and it's actually not. I feel like at that age, and for a long time, I sort of became this like genius in the language of grief. I thought so much about it. All I did was think about loss and grief and joy and the way they interplay. And I wrote songs and I lived my life through that lens. But I didn't. But I also, at the same time, which I realize now, I was sort of like, and now I'm like an infant in a lot of other things because I didn't consider them. And if I didn't have this tragic moment, then I would have looked at a lot of things differently and looked at relationships and what worked and what didn't work, and not just had this sort of catch-all of like, well, I messed up because my sister died, which is true, but it's not everything. And so I've reached a point in my life where I'm kind of doubling back on some other stuff and looking at it and saying, well, there were some fault lines here to begin with, and now I get to be this person who thought they knew everything about sadness and grief, but only through one lens.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I was in my early 20s when my father died, and I had panic attacks and started to see everything through the lens of grief, and felt like
Yeah.
when people were upset about their cat dying, I was like, oh, give it up. You don't even know what it feels like to feel sad. But you're right. And then like last year, I realized that I was stuck at that age perpetually since then. And I'd never gone on from that age. And only when I realized that, it seems like you're there now too, that I got to start my life. I got to pick it up. I got to,
Yeah. Well, you do
yeah,
freeze.
yeah, yeah.
And there's also a pride to it. I mean, look, you do anything to have it not be the case, but the bottom line is the story of my life is that a thing happened that was massive, and I technically have lived through and have had a decent life and been able to express myself and not totally shut down. So there's an armor to it. You think a toughness, like you would never want it, and you would never want it again, but it is a defining thing. And but you do realize it's something that you can hinge on. And I wanted to talk more about some of the fault lines in my life and the way I see things and in my family beyond this event.
But you do it in such a joyful way, musically, especially like the contrast of your music being introspective and often actually quite sad, and then joyful in its musical properties has always really been interesting to me in your work.
I think New Jersey is a big part of that. I think the musical heritage, which I grew up on, is big on, get me out of here. This melancholy feeling of being left out, sadness, outskirts of New York City, kind of nothing's happening here, everything's happening there. But then the joy comes in with the hope. So much hope in what else is out there in the world, and these are such New Jersey concepts. And then cut to these events that we were just talking about, and trauma, and them hitting you at a time when you also were filled with hopes. When I was 18 and my sister died, I was like so low, but also so high. I was like, had this like sense of like almost like avenging her death or living in tribute, grabbing life in this most absurd, idealistic way because it was taken from someone else. So I've always been just so attached to these feelings of hope and darkness existing all together, and how they interplay with each other is so odd and exciting to me.
Yeah, well, we're both from smaller, harder done by places, and we both moved to bigger, more exciting places. But I mean, speaking of Jersey, I need to play this. Jack Antonoff of Bleachers is my guest. That's Bleachers with Chinatown featuring Bruce Springsteen. I mean, my God, Jack, what we're talking about, of that juxtaposition of joyful hope and darkness, literally darkness on the edge of town.
Yeah, his work is so imprinted on me. And, there's a big difference between loving music versus hearing music that speaks to your experience. And, I remember when I was a kid, really young, I could sing you every part of every Beatles song ever, every bass line, every horn line, every lyric. But when I heard Bruce's music, I recognized something else, which I hadn't experienced yet as a young person, which is I heard things I knew about, literal landmarks, literal landscapes, but more importantly, a feeling that I had that I hadn't heard echoed. And it was massive to me. He's the artist who made me feel like, the emotion in the landscape that I was from not only had value, but had like a big musical heritage that mattered, that really mattered. And at that point I was starting to really get into this local punk scene in New Jersey, which ended up, becoming actually quite influential. And I just got really, I just was filled with this pride of, where I'm from and the sound of it. And just started this quest to kind of bake it into everything I do, all the way to this album where I get to actually have Bruce on a song that I was only able to write through a lot of the things he had given me as an artist.
But when someone's sort of a Mount Rushmorean figure to you, and then you actually have to go into a studio and collaborate with them, it's a different dynamic. I mean, I just know even from doing this job, Jack, like,
well, yeah, but it didn't happen like that. Him and his wife Patty are dear friends, very important people as humans, as artists. And I never sat down and thought I'm going to do a song with Bruce. I don't think that with any of my collaborations really. Like, I think things only happen, and there can be something obnoxious about being like, oh, it happened organically, but it really does. You can't plan, because if you plan something, then you're planning from what you know, and what you know is not how the future is made. What you know is the past, so it's the same thing. People sometimes ask me like, oh, who would you love to collaborate with? And it's like, well, I could run a list of people whose work I love, but I only know their past. I don't, when I collaborate with someone, we were talking about these like tiny, intimate, secret things of where we want to go. So with that being said, it was just the most organic thing, hanging out, playing each other some music. I had written Chinatown. I had a sort of a working tape of it. Everyone's, there's a studio at their place. So then we start messing around with it. And I just thought it was really a fun, cool day. It wasn't until a little later that I listened back and heard Bruce sing on the second chorus and thought, goddamn, this really works. There's something circular here. It sounds like Bleachers, but you can feel, the sort of like gifts and inspiration that he's given me. And then to hear him come in on it. I was all the heaviness and context sort of drifted away, and I just loved it and wanted to put a helmet on it and then eventually share it.
What's he like?
Exactly as advertised. He's the best.
Yeah, really.
And I've noticed this. I think he's similar to a lot of really brilliant artists that I've gotten to know in my time, which is as advertised. The funny thing about writing records and essentially selling them, is it only works if there's no bullshit. Otherwise, you're a salesman. And and some people do that great, and there's a lot of great work that's been made in that context. But for me, it's kind of like I feel myself most, and I recognize others most when they're doing what they do, and then sort of just taking it out there with a lack of cynicism and a pride. And so sometimes it's not that deep.
I'm so glad you didn't say, "Oh, he's terrible." Made me get him, made me get him filtered water.
Well, yeah, I don't know a lot of people like that. I think, there's a bunch of people in my life that have had an interesting imprint culturally through their art. And, it's obviously, like, for me to say it's not that deep is interesting because it's obviously incredibly deep. But at the end of the day, it's like the highest form of this work is like you're trying to make these sounds and tell these stories that are you and sound like you and sound singular. And sometimes the closer you get to that, the more you're just that.
Well, speaking of artists that have made a great imprint, take a listen to this.
I'm in a getaway car.
Ah!
And I'm losing my
something.
Thinking about
I'm in a getaway car. And you're in the motel bar. Or like,
yeah, I'm in the getaway car. Left you in the motel bar. Took the money.
Took the money in the bag, and I stole
the money. Took the
put
money
the money in the bag, and I stole the keys. That was the last time you ever saw me. That was the last time you ever saw me.
That is a clip of my guest Jack Antonoff working with Taylor Swift on her song "Getaway Car." Tell me what we heard there.
That was in this room. It was right there. That's the only time in my life that I've seen that clip, and it's wild. The kind of lightning moment of writing something with someone was actually captured. She was recording with her phone. It's the only time. You get those every once in a while, and I can't believe that one was actually captured.
What's the story of her kind of believing in you as a producer first?
Well, being a producer is like, I've always been an artist and songwriter, and I've always thought of myself as a producer and loved hearing things in my head and making it sound that way. But you can be a very unsuccessful artist and songwriter, and I've at different points in my life been that. You can go out and you can play to no one, and you can write songs in your room, and there's an armor to that. No one can take it away from you. I've been a songwriter since I was 10.
Yeah.
And I've been a performer since I was 14 and an artist through all of that. Right. But a producer is a little bit more like a relationship, like I can't tell you I'm married if I'm not, you kind of need someone to call you a producer. But, I always thought of myself as a producer, but if you're only kind of producing your own music, at least publicly, it's sort of like, well, you're just doing that, what makes you a producer. And so you kind of need someone to recognize you as a producer. And ironically for me, it was Taylor, because she's obviously a very big artist. And so, and then, I remember, a song called Out of the Woods, we were working on it. And I always loved the way I would make things sound, but at least early on when I started kind of working with other people, there was a sort of a sense of like, cool, now this person will produce it or whatever it is. And I remember I sent it to her and in true her fashion, she said, great, this is it. And I was like, holy wow, okay. And overnight I was someone who, at least from, I always thought I could have done it, but from a public point of view and an industry point of view, I'm someone who could produce a Taylor Swift record. So that makes me a producer to all the people who needed a reference. She was my reference.
It's pretty good reference to have.
There's no better one. And it's pretty poetic if you know her and if you know how she works, which I think you do, because I think the audience knows at this point that, it's not calculated, it's heart and soul.
Yeah.
It's what she loves and what she feels.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think about, it's not calculated, it's heart and soul. And actually going back to what you were saying about Bruce, that's sticking with me too. So Lorde, Taylor, Lana Del Rey, St. Vincent. I could keep going on and on and on. You have very fast mute finger, by the way.
Sorry, I have this allergies really bad. I'm just trying to turn it off every time I sniff or whatever. It feels like a very unattractive sound.
No, but it's a solid, great production engineer move. I really
thank you. But yeah, the I'm going on the keyboard. But yeah, the way that the radio compresses things, these sniffs could be horrible, man.
Well, I appreciate it. All those artists I just mentioned, is there a common thread between them? Or even are you at a point now where there needs to be something that all those artists share, something that you need to have a working relationship with somebody?
A lack of cynicism. I think all these people are very different. And we kind of, when we make records together, we're on these planets that are so other from each other. But there is a thread, which is a sort of completely non-cynical belief in the process and why and how it's done and what is the bar, where it is, which is so far and so high and so beyond. You don't make I don't think you should be making records unless you are setting that bar so far beyond where you think you're capable of going each time and then chasing it. But yeah, just a deep lack of cynicism. It's such a sort of powerless job to do. You don't know if you're going to get it. You don't know if you'll ever get it. Every time you do it, you think it's the last one. Even when you played that clip of Taylor and I writing, I had this feeling of like, wonder if I'll ever have that moment again. It's you dedicate your life to something that you can't guarantee you can do.
It's a world that, and you're doing that in a world that can reward cynicism.
Oh, there's tons of cynicism because, well, I think the quality of what this work creates and how hard it is creates a lot of ego in people as a reaction. I think it's absurd because it's like, how dare you imagine, like, you can't tell me you could write a song right now. You can't tell me your sounds are the best. Like, you just sort of, we all do it and pray and set the bar crazy high and then don't stop until it's there. But there's weird factors like being a public figure or being paid very well or being scrutinized or criticized.
Having a social media profile, like.
Yeah, any of it. But it's all separate, man. It's all just so separate than what happens when you're in the studio, which is just the purest, most basic attempt at, chasing some experience you can't define.
Are you changed by working with other artists? Like, is your music changed by working with other artists?
Constantly. But I would say the biggest inspiration I get from people is I am lucky to be surrounded by a group of people who see this work in a similar way and can kind of function as each other's armor. If you find people that
armor,
yeah, just to stay the path of what we do and why we do it and how we recognize ourselves within that. There's endless pressure to do it the wrong way from good people. Good people pressure you to do it the wrong way because they don't know how it's done.
What's the wrong way?
To try to manufacture it, to try to repeat yourself, to try to connect it to a thread that's happening culturally. I would say the biggest wrong way to do it is to in any way be influenced or swayed by what's happening in the world and change how you would want something to sound so it could fit into some zone, which could give you more success
more
from
money.
A commercial point of view.
Yeah.
Which I actually don't believe. I think ironically what's really cool about art is historically you get the most rewarded for making the best work. And I think that's something that is really cool.
Jack,
and the fact that, biggest selling albums of all time are like Fleetwood Mac or Joni Mitchell or Miles Davis or Stevie Wonder is a very good thing to keep in the back of your head.
Yeah. Thriller. Nothing sounded like Thriller.
It's very, but you're surrounded by an industry who you can find yourself becoming very mad at, but they don't know any better. This is an industry with all this money and all these jobs, and they do a thing that they don't know how to do. We don't know how to do it. We're not making, you could put all the best producers and best artists in a room and get total you just don't know. And I think that's so anxiety producing and creates all this ego and creates all these ideas. And I can do this. And I got the best sounds and I got the best songs and I'm the best executive, but it's all so deeply powerless. And that's kind of what I like about it, to be honest.
But hopeful. Like the way I think about it, and this is in terms of my job, the way I think about it is, I guess in my job, I'm just sitting down and talking to people and hoping that the thing I say sounds okay and hoping that their answer is okay.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing. It's an act of faith. There's a lot of hope and a lot of faith, and that's and things like hope and faith don't sit well, I think, in like billion-dollar industries. So I think people inject a lot of sureness and plans, but the whole thing is a weird act of faith. How the fuck are you going to make an album? That's a crazy act of faith. How are you going to make your best album? And then on top of all that, imagine the amount of hope and faith that you think that you're going to find your people out there after you do it. The whole thing is such a leap of faith that it's just remarkable to imagine that anyone could bring ego into it.
Before we go, Jack,
They do.
I love talking to you. Before we go, I thought maybe you could pick a song off the record, because I find that sometimes when I talk to artists, there's a song on the record that they might want to have a bit more love. And I thought maybe it'd be fun to close things off with you picking one out.
And you'll play it?
Yeah.
In that case, I'll go with a song called Secret Life. It's just in the place I'm in right now where I'm feeling a little vulnerable and starting to talk about all these things. It's a song I wrote about creating a just secret world with someone. And it's a sister. There's a song called Big Life and a song called Secret Life. Big Life is all like, I want a big life. You know, is it you? Is it a big romance, big love, big career, everything? And Secret Life is just about shutting the door and wanting to be bored with someone. And I love this song. I love how it came out.
Jack, nice to meet you.
Great to talk, and I'd love to do it in person one day if you ever want to talk longer.
Jack Antonoff was my guest. His band is Bleachers. Their new album, Take the Sadness Out of Saturday Night, is out everywhere July 30th.